August 12, 1952. Captain Jesse Brown's wingman, Ensign Thomas Hudner, watches as a Marine rifle company gets pinned down by Chinese machine gun positions on a ridgeline near the Chasen Reservoir. The Marines are taking casualties, can't advance, can't retreat. They're calling for air support. Jets have already made passes, F-80 shooting stars, the modern marvels of the jet age. They dropped their ordnance and screamed past at 400 miles per hour. They missed. Too fast. Too high. Not precise enough. Now it's the Corsairs' turn. The bent-wing beasts from World War II. The obsolete propeller planes. And in the next 10 minutes, those Marines are going to learn why ground troops pray for Corsairs, not jets. Welcome to the untold story of the Korean War. You know about MiG Alley. You know about the jet versus jet combat, the F-86 Sabres dueling with MiG-15s. That's the glamorous story. The one that made headlines. But here's what your father or uncle who fought in Korea will tell you. When you were pinned down, when you were getting overrun, when you needed someone to save your life, you didn't want jets. You wanted Corsairs. You wanted the ugly, loud, bent-wing monsters from the last war. Because they could do things jets couldn't dream of. Let me start with something that should shock you. Pilots who were qualified to fly jets were requesting transfers to fly Corsairs instead. Think about that. It's 1950, 1951. The jet age has arrived. Jets are the future. They're faster, more modern, more prestigious. Every pilot wanted to fly jets, right? Wrong. Marine and Navy pilots who actually understood close air support were volunteering to fly World War II-era propeller planes. Why? Because jets were useless at the job that actually mattered. Here's the problem with jets in Korea. They're too fast. An F-80 shooting star cruises at around 400 miles per hour. At that speed, a pilot gets maybe 3-4 seconds over the target. You're screaming in, trying to identify enemy positions, distinguish friendlies from enemies, line up your shot, drop ordnance, and get out. All in seconds. And you're doing this while traveling faster than sound can warn the enemy you're coming. Sounds great, except you can't hit anything with precision. The F4U Corsair. She cruises at about 200 miles per hour, half the speed, and she can slow down even more. A Corsair pilot can orbit over the battlefield for hours, talk to the ground troops, identify targets, make multiple passes, adjust fire. The Corsair can loiter. She can stay on station. And in close air support, that's everything. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Kirkland flew both jets and Corsairs in Korea. In an interview recorded in the 1980s, he explained it perfectly. Flying a jet doing close air support was like trying to do surgery with a chainsaw. Fast, powerful, but no precision. The Corsair was a scalpel. Slow enough to see what you're shooting at, tough enough to take ground fire, and deadly accurate when you needed it. Let's talk about what made the Corsair so perfect for Korea. First, that distinctive bent wing, the gull wing design. It looks weird, but there's genius in it. The bent wing allowed for shorter, stronger landing gear while keeping the massive propeller clear of the ground. That propeller is over 13 feet in diameter, one of the largest ever put on a fighter. And that propeller, driven by a 2,300 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine, gave the Corsair incredible low-speed performance and the ability to carry massive amounts of ordnance. A Corsair in Korea typically carried 8 5-inch rockets under the wings, 2,000-pound bombs or napalm canisters, and 6 50 caliber machine guns with 2,400 rounds. Some missions, they'd swap the bombs for more rockets or additional fuel tanks. The plane could carry almost as much ordnance as a World War II medium bomber, but deliver it with fighter precision. And here's the beautiful thing. The Corsair was built like a tank. That big radial engine up front, it could take multiple hits from ground fire and keep running. The airframe was designed to handle carrier landings, violent, brutal impacts, which meant it could absorb battle damage that would tear apart lighter aircraft. Pilots came back with holes in their wings, damaged control surfaces, hydraulic leaks, and the Corsair just kept flying. Major John Bolt, a Marine aviator who became an ace in Korea, described the Corsair as the most forgiving aircraft I ever flew. He said you could abuse it, push it beyond its limits, take hits that should bring you down and she'd get you home. In one incident, Bolt took ground fire that severed his hydraulic lines. No flaps, no brakes, barely any control. He landed the Corsair anyway, rolling off the end of the runway into a ditch, walked away without a scratch. The plane was repaired and flying again 3 days later. Now let's talk about the missions. Close air support in Korea was brutal, dangerous work. You're flying low, sometimes below 500 feet over enemy positions. They can see you coming. They can shoot at you with everything from rifles to anti-aircraft guns. You're exposed, vulnerable, but the ground troops need you, so you go in anyway. A typical close air support mission would start with a call from a forward air controller, usually an officer embedded with the ground troops. He'd identify the target, a machine gun nest, a mortar position, enemy troops in a trench line. The FAC would mark the target with smoke or describe landmarks. Then the Corsairs would come in. The first pass might be reconnaissance. Circle the area, identify the target, make sure you know where friendly troops are. Radio back to the FAC. I see the target, I see your position, we're ready to engage. Then the attack runs begin. Rocket attacks were common. The Corsair would roll into a dive, line up on the target, and at the right moment fire the 5-inch rockets in pairs. These weren't precision weapons like modern missiles. They were unguided, ballistic, but a skilled pilot could put them within meters of the target. And when a 5-inch rocket hits, it devastates everything in the blast radius. Machine gun positions cease to exist. Bunkers collapse. Enemy troops caught in the open are shredded. If rockets didn't do the job, there was napalm, the jellied gasoline bombs that turned hillsides into infernos. Corsairs would come in low, maybe 200 feet, and release the napalm canisters. They'd tumble through the air and impact, spreading liquid fire across the target area. Napalm was horrifying and brutally effective. It cleared trenches, destroyed fortifications, and broke enemy morale like nothing else. And then there were the strafing runs. 650 caliber machine guns firing in concert. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute. That's 4,800 rounds per minute total, concentrated in a stream of fire that walked across enemy positions. Pilots described the sound inside the cockpit as a continuous roar, the smell of gun smoke filling the plane. The Corsair would shake from the recoil. But those 650s could cut through light vehicles, destroy equipment, and suppress enemy fire instantly. Let me tell you about a specific mission that shows you what Corsairs could do. September 14, 1950, the Pusan perimeter. North Korean forces are trying to break through the last American defensive line. If they succeed, they push the UN forces into the sea. The war is over. A battalion of the 5th Marine Regiment is holding a critical position near the Naktong River. They're outnumbered, low on ammunition, taking casualties. North Korean troops are massing for a final assault. The Marines call for air support. 4 Corsairs from VMF 214 respond, Marine Fighter Squadron 214. The flight leader is Captain Philip DeLong. He arrives over the battlefield and sees the situation. Marines dug in on a ridgeline, North Korean forces advancing from 3 sides, heavy fire coming from multiple positions. The Marines are about to be overrun. DeLong doesn't have time for careful planning. He makes the call, immediate attack, all ordnance, danger close. Danger close means you're dropping bombs and firing rockets so near friendly troops that there's risk of hitting them. It's terrifying for everyone involved. But it's that or let the Marines get wiped out. The Corsairs go in. First pass, rockets into the North Korean positions on the left flank. Direct hits. Explosions tear through the enemy lines. Second pass, napalm on the right flank. The hillside erupts in flames. North Korean troops caught in the open are incinerated. Third pass, strafing the center. The 650s from 4 Corsairs, 24 machine guns total, rake the enemy positions. Its overwhelming firepower delivered with precision. The North Korean assault breaks. Troops that were advancing are now retreating, falling back under the onslaught. The Marines hold their position. Later that day, When the situation stabilizes, Marine officers go out to inspect the results. They find North Korean bodies and equipment shredded by the Corsair attack. The enemy had been minutes away from breaking through. The Corsairs stopped them cold. Captain DeLong's after-action report is preserved in Marine Corps archives. He wrote, "We expended all ordnance in approximately 12 minutes, all rockets on target, napalm effective, strafing runs suppressed remaining enemy fire. Ground commander reports enemy assault repelled, no friendly casualties from air support." That last line is key, no friendly casualties. They dropped bombs and fired rockets within 100 yards of Marine positions and nobody got hit. That's skill. That's precision. That's what made the Corsair invaluable. Here's something else that made Corsairs special in Korea. The pilots knew their aircraft inside and out. Most of them had flown Corsairs in World War II. They'd been flying this plane for years, some for nearly a decade. They knew every quirk, every limitation, every capability. Compare that to jet pilots, many of whom were still learning their aircraft. Jets were new, still being figured out. But Corsair pilots, they were masters of their craft. The maintenance crews deserve recognition too. These guys were keeping World War II aircraft operational in a modern war. Parts were scarce. Some components weren't being manufactured anymore. So the mechanics improvised, cannibalized parts from damaged aircraft, made repairs that weren't in any manual. They kept those Corsairs flying through sheer determination and ingenuity. Chief Aviation Machinist's mate Robert Hansen was a crew chief with VMF 323. He later described the challenge. "We were working on planes that were designed in the late 1930s, built in the early 1940s, and now it's 1951. Some of these airframes had been through World War II, but our pilots needed them airworthy, so we made it happen. I've seen guys rebuild an engine overnight, using parts from 3 different planes, just to get a Corsair back in the air for the next day's mission. And the pilots pushed those planes hard. Corsairs were rated for a certain number of flight hours, a certain number of carrier landings, certain stress limits. In Korea, those limits were routinely exceeded. Pilots would dive steeper, pull harder, carry more weight, fly longer missions. The planes held together because they were overbuilt to begin with, designed with huge safety margins. But still, it's testament to both the aircraft and the men maintaining them that the Corsair remained effective throughout the war. Let's talk about night missions, because this is where the Corsair really proved its worth. Night interdiction, hunting enemy supply convoys and troop movements under cover of darkness. Jets couldn't do this effectively. They were too fast, their pilots couldn't see well enough at jet speeds in the dark. But Corsairs, they owned the night. Night Corsair pilots would fly low over North Korean supply routes, looking for vehicles, troops, anything moving. When they spotted something, they'd attack. Flares would be dropped to illuminate the target, then rockets and strafing runs would destroy the convoy. It was incredibly dangerous, flying low and slow at night over enemy territory, but it was devastatingly effective at cutting North Korean supply lines. Lieutenant Guy Bordelin became the only Navy ace of the Korean War flying night missions in a Corsair. He shot down 5 North Korean aircraft, Po-2 biplanes and Yak-18 trainers that the North Koreans were using for harassment attacks. These were slow-moving planes, and jets couldn't catch them because jets couldn't fly slow enough. But Bordelin and his Corsair could match their speed, stalk them and shoot them down. 5 kills, all at night, all in a propeller plane. The Navy gave him the nickname Lucky Pier, but luck had nothing to do with it. It was skill and the right aircraft for the job. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why don't we hear more about Corsairs in Korea? Why is the narrative all about jets? Simple. Jets were the future and the military wanted to promote that narrative. Jets were modern, exciting, newsworthy. Prop planes were yesterday's technology. So the public relations focused on jet combat, MiG Alley, the ace pilots in Sabres, the Corsairs doing the real work. That was unglamorous ground support. It didn't make headlines. But ask anyone who fought on the ground in Korea, and they'll tell you a different story. They'll tell you about hearing that distinctive sound of the Corsair's engine, the deep, powerful roar that meant help was arriving. They'll tell you about watching Corsairs dive through anti-aircraft fire to deliver ordnance on enemy positions that were overrunning your trench line. They'll tell you about pilots who made multiple passes, expended all their ammunition, and stayed on station talking to ground troops until relief arrived. The infantrymen loved Corsairs. There are letters, diary entries, oral histories from Korean War ground troops, and they talk about Corsair pilots like guardian angels. Fast movers, jets would make one pass and disappear. But Corsairs would stay, work the target, adjust their attacks based on feedback from the ground. They felt like they were part of your unit, not just planes flying overhead. Here's a specific example that captures this. July 19, 1953. A company from the 7th Infantry Division is ambushed near the punch bowl. They're taking heavy casualties from mortar and machine gun fire. Multiple FAC calls go out. A flight of F-86s responds first, Sabrejets. They make a high-speed pass, drop their bombs, and leave. The bombs land too far from the enemy positions. The ground commander reports minimal effect. Then 2 Corsairs arrive. The flight leader talks directly to the company commander via radio, asks questions. Where exactly are the enemy positions? Where are your troops? What's the wind direction? The Corsair orbits slowly, pilot visually identifying the targets. Then he makes his attack, rockets into the mortar positions, direct hits, napalm on the machine gun nests. The company commander is watching through binoculars, calling corrections. 50 yards left, you're right on them. The Corsair adjusts, makes another pass. More rockets, more strafing. 20 minutes of sustained attack. The Corsairs expend everything they have. When they finally leave, the enemy fire has stopped. The ambush is broken. The company can withdraw. The after-action report notes. Air support from Corsair flight was decisive in breaking contact with enemy forces. Precision and sustained fire support prevented significant casualties. That's the Corsair in Korea. Not glamorous, not making headlines, just saving lives and doing the job that needed to be done. The F4U Corsair flew over 64,000 sorties in Korea. That's more combat missions than any other Navy or Marine aircraft. They destroyed countless enemy positions, vehicles, and fortifications. More importantly, they saved thousands of American and UN lives through close air support. But because they were propeller planes in the jet age, their contribution is often overlooked or minimized. Here's the irony. The jets that everyone celebrates. They needed the Corsairs. The Sabres flying MiG Alley were there to achieve air superiority, to keep enemy jets away from ground attack aircraft. Who were those ground attack aircraft? Corsairs. The entire air war strategy depended on props doing the actual ground support work while jets kept the skies clear. Without Corsairs, the ground war in Korea would have been far bloodier and potentially unwinnable. The last Corsair combat mission in Korea was flown on December 20, 1952, by Marine fighter squadrons. By then, jets were finally starting to take over close air support roles. The AD Skyraider, another prop plane, was also handling a lot of ground support. But the Corsair had proven something important. Newer doesn't always mean better. Sometimes the old warhorse, the proven platform, the reliable beast you know inside and out, is exactly what you need. Pilots who flew Corsairs in Korea talk about the aircraft with a reverence that's almost spiritual. They describe it as an extension of themselves, a machine they trusted completely. Many of them had flown dozens, even hundreds of combat missions in that aircraft. They knew that when things got desperate, when the mission was dangerous, when lives hung in the balance, the Corsair would get them through. Captain Jesse Brown, the Navy's first black aviator, died in a Corsair crash near Chosin in December 1950. His wingman, Thomas Hudner, crash-landed his own Corsair trying to save him. Hudner received the Medal of Honor for his actions. Both men were flying World War II aircraft, proving themselves in a new war, demonstrating the courage and skill that defined Corsair pilots. The F4U Corsair was designed in 1938, first flew in 1940, saw action throughout World War II in the Pacific, and then, 5 years after that war ended, it went back to war in Korea and proved it was still the best aircraft for close air support. That's a 16-year combat career. Think about that. An aircraft designed before Pearl Harbor was still the go-to choice for Marine pilots in 1952. Today, when military historians talk about Korea, they focus on jets because that's the historic significance. First jet war, new era of aviation. And that's fine. It's historically important. But if you want to understand what actually won battles, what actually saved lives, what actually mattered to the men on the ground, you have to talk about the Corsair. The bent-wing beast, the prop plane that refused to become obsolete, the World War II relic that outperformed jets at the job that mattered most, the aircraft that ground troops prayed for when they were in trouble. That's the F4U Corsair in Korea. That's the real story, and that's something worth remembering. So the next time someone tells you Korea was the jet war, you tell them about the Corsairs. You tell them about pilots who chose props over jets. You tell them about the thousands of sorties, the precision strikes, the lives saved. You tell them that sometimes the old ways work best, and sometimes the most important hero is the one nobody's talking about. The F4U Corsair. In Korea, it didn't just survive, it dominated. And the men who flew it, maintained it, and depended on it knew something that history is still learning. Greatness isn't about being the newest or the fastest. It's about being the best at what needs to be done. And in Korea, nothing did it better than the bent-wing beast.